Cory here.
Oh, he's in.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I've been here for a little bit, and it's just good to see everybody, or see one person at a time. See Cliff's Einstein-looking hair.
You're just jealous, man.
That is a true statement. That is a true statement.
Where did you get those photos?
Serrano told me about them. Thank you so much. I have not seen him yet, but he's been hard at work in making this gift for, confidentially, for the senator we discussed. I won't say the name.
Got it. Cool.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I think he'll be really touched. Hey, there I see everybody.
All our guests who are just coming in, we're going to take another minute or so to let the rest of our attendees come on in. So just give us another minute and we'll get started. Thank you.
Senator Booker, I just want to say my nephew graduated Penn a few years ago, and you spoke at his graduation.
Oh.
And I just want to tell you there wasn't a dry eye in the entire stadium. It was amazing. I mean, it was such a great speech. So I'm really excited and honored that you're here. So thank you.
I'm grateful. I hope he's doing well.
He's incredible. And I just remember after you spoke and we walked out of the graduation, I looked at my sister-in-law and I that's when you realize that the pride of having a nephew, a son, my kids are young still, graduate a school like that. And when you hear those kinds of speeches, you come out just head held high and so proud. It was very, very proud moment for our family. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, I think we're going to get started. I want to say hello to everybody. I'm Hilary Helstein, director of the Los Angeles Jewish Film Festival. I want to welcome you to our special program today in honor of Jewish American Heritage Month. And specifically today, today is the Day of Action Against Anti-Semitism. We are honored to bring you this exclusive Q&A about the powerful and moving documentary, Joachim Prinz, I Shall Not Be Silent. Some of our audience has had a chance to see it. And for those of you who have not, we have just extended the viewing period by a week. So that should give you plenty of time to see the film. And I'm sure after the Q&A today, you're going to want to go out and see it immediately tonight. Anyway, we are looking forward to what I know is going to be a very meaningful and thought-provoking discussion today. I would like to express my gratitude to all our panelists for their time. It is a rare occasion to hear these extraordinary people together on a panel and discussion on issues of racism, anti-Semitism, and unity. And I am personally grateful to you for your commitment. Thank you. I would also like to thank Rachel Fisher and Menemsha Films for giving us the opportunity to present the film to you this week and the Q&A today. I would also like to thank our LAJFF partners, Stephen Weiss Temple, the Black Jewish Entertainment Alliance, the American Jewish Committee, Jewish World Watch, and Valley Beth Shalom. I would like to thank our sponsors who make it possible for us to continue to bring important programs to you like today's. Joachim Prinz, I Shall Not Be Silent, is a remarkable film. The film first came out in 2014, and we showed it at the festival back then. But while the film has remained the same, we are now seeing it through different eyes, through new eyes. We have changed. Our society has changed with the onslaught of racism and anti-Semitism. This week marks the anniversary of George Floyd's death. And over the past few weeks, Jews have been violently attacked, including an incident right here in Los Angeles, just right near the Beverly Center. Synagogues and African-American churches have been vandalized. Witnessing how the intolerance and violence has escalated to the unprecedented extent it has reached, Rabbi Prinz's message is more profound now than ever. Now, I'd like to give you a little background on our guests. And I want to remind our audience that you can submit questions that you have through the Q&A button on your screen, so we can take some of your questions at the end. But please limit your please limit your thoughts to questions only. Now, I'd like to introduce our panelists that you see here. We have the filmmaker, Rachel Fisher. We have, you can see everybody, okay. We have Deborah Prinz, who is the daughter of Rabbi Joachim Prinz. We have with us Orly Marley, who is a member of the Black Jewish Entertainment Alliance, whose mission is to work to bring the two communities together in solidarity and support each other in the struggle against hatred and bigotry. Orly is an Israeli-born American married to Grammy-winning reggae icon Ziggy Marley. We have with us Rabbi Hilary Laufer. She is the rabbi at Stephen Weiss Temple in Los Angeles. We have our moderator, Rabbi Cliff Kulwin, who is Rabbi Emeritus at Temple B'nai Abraham in New Jersey, the congregation formerly of Rabbi Prinz. And finally, our special guest, who really needs no introduction, and his name is not Andrew Serrano, is Senator Cory Booker. I'd like to say a few words about him and then turn it over to Rabbi Kulwin to make a formal introduction to Senator Booker and to Senator Booker himself. Cory Booker is a United States Senator from New Jersey and previously served as mayor of Newark, New Jersey. Senator Booker sits on the Judiciary Committee, the Foreign Relations Committee, and the Environment and Public Works Committee. He has a reputation as a leader with innovative ideas and bold actions. Booker has dedicated his life to fighting for those who have been left out, left behind, or left without a voice. Senator Booker has a BA and MA from Stanford University. He was awarded a Rhodes Scholarship and went on to study at Oxford University and completed his law degree at Yale. I now welcome Rabbi Kulwin and Senator Booker. Oh, Cliff, you're muted.
Hilary, thank you. I appreciate it. And great. I was trying to think, how many times have I introduced you over the last 20 years?
A
Too
good
many. I want you to introduce me next time.
I would like that. That would be an honor. I've had the chance to introduce you, roast you, love all over you before. So I would love that opportunity again.
Indeed. As well you should. I became the rabbi of Temple B'nai Abraham. Joachim Prinz was my predecessor's predecessor in 1999. And that year was important for me for two reasons. One of them was, while I knew the name, that was the year I began to learn about the extraordinary life of Joachim Prinz. And that was also the year that I met and began a friendship with an extraordinary gentleman named Cory Booker. Senator Booker, for the last 2 decades, has been a great friend of Temple B'nai Abraham and an extraordinary member, not just in his political personality, but as a member of the African-American community and as an extraordinarily knowledgeable Gentile about all things Jewish. For that reason, very seriously, he has served in countless ways as a bridge between the two communities and has helped each to understand the other in a most positive, energetic, cheerful, and at times even fun way. I know that, to put it mildly, you are busy. We're grateful you've got a few minutes to spend with us this evening. You, history, the present day, what's on your mind?
Well, first of all, the reason why he said a few minutes wasn't because of my rushiness, because he just knows that I have the temptation to be a rabbi and a black minister combined, which means that I could sit here for an hour or two and just go on about one of my favorite subjects and my favorite people. Literally, there is a beautiful photo that is 10 feet from me that this man, with an incredible act of chesed, kindness, this Rabbi Kulwin gave me to hang in my Senate office, and it's one of my most prized possessions. And I love when people come here, they recognize King, but they don't recognize one of the more powerful forces of spiritual light, I think. in that period of American civil rights movement was Joachim Prinz. And the truth is, Rabbi Prinz had that unenviable position of speaking at the March on Washington right before Martin Luther King, and it is a light for me, though, a beacon to be able to look here on tough days and see these two men standing together. There were words from the Torah where King was killed at the Lorraine Motel. If you go there and look down, you will see words from the Torah. It says the words of Joseph's brothers before they grabbed him and threw him into a pit. They say, "Behold, here cometh the dreamer. Let us slay him and see what becomes of his dream." I worry about our dream. It is precious and it is fragile, and every generation must prove worthy of it, protecting it, strengthening it, and advancing the ideals behind that dream. And what I've realized it takes, as King said so eloquently, today we have to repent not for the vitriolic words and violent actions of the bad people, but the appalling silence and inaction of the good people. And to me, those words can't be enough. It is a sentiment, it is an ideal, and the reality is we live in a nation where we are falling short of this understanding that we must act. This documentary, this film, calls for that. Joachim Prinz said, "I believe that the time has come for us to work together," he said, "for it is not enough to hope together, and it is not enough to pray together." I am distraught at what is going on in our country. The levels of hate and viciousness, the levels of anti-Semitism that are rampant in our communities. And I'll tell you, I worry that it's not enough to say, I am against, I'm not racist. That's not enough to say. If racism exists, then you must be an anti-racist. It's not enough to say that I'm not an anti-Semite. But if anti-Semitism exists, we all have an obligation to work together, to act, to be working and fighting against anti-Semitism. And so I adore Rabbi Prinz. I was the mayor of the city where he had a shul. I am honored that he lives a life not of an exemplary, simple fighter for his community, but that calling of Hillel, which he lived so profoundly. If I am not for myself, who will be for me? If I am only for myself, not who am I? You lose your humanity. What am I? And if not now, when? That is the reason why, as he traveled through the South, looking to raise resources and focus on the cause of the Nazi scourge, when he witnessed the horrible conditions of African Americans, he stood up and became a part of a movement. That to me is not just allyship. That to me is love. Is love. And so tonight I'll end with this before Cliff starts. I can always tell when he thinks I'm talking too long. He starts to shift a little bit, and you can see him. But I just want to call on all of us in a time of crisis. This is when we need heroes. And to lionize an individual is rightful in the case of Rabbi Prinz. But if you're left and sitting back at him in awe and reverence, I don't think that's what he would have wanted. I think that what he wants is for more of us to stand up and be a part of it. And what's necessary for that is to clearly understand the oneness of us as a people. I sit here today as the fourth popularly elected African American in the United States Senate, not just because of Frederick Douglass, not just because of Martin Luther King, not just because of Sojourner Truth. I sit here because of people like Rabbi Joachim Prinz. I sit here because of people like Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner, Black and Jewish, who stood together, sacrificed together, even suffered and died together. I will tell you that those words at the Lorraine Motel where King was killed, I read them one night, and it was a night I was very exhausted. I just flew into Israel with my parents, put them to bed at the King David Hotel, and the people who were protecting me, these two Israelis, former Special Forces officers, sort of intimidated me because they were like, "We will go for a ride." And I'm like, "It's late. No, we will go for a ride." And I get in the Jeep with them, and my friend who was with me, and we drive out into the desert, and I will never forget, I'm nervous as heck. The cell service goes out, and I'm like, oh my God, is this what they do to the Goyim when they get them here? And next thing you know, I get, they start driving up a hill, my cell service comes back, and then I see the city. And we set up there a campfire. They said they wanted to get to know the mayor of New Jersey. I was just the mayor of Newark then, but they gave me a bigger title. And as they were pointing out to me the sites, I'll never forget they pointed to Mount Nebo. And instantly, I thought of Martin Luther King. And I asked them for their iPad, which they had. And there in the Israeli desert, I played this speech. Martin Luther King, I've been to the mountaintop. I've looked over. I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but we as a people will make it to the promised land. And these words echoing out into the night sky. And I told them about the Torah portion, which happened to be the one that included the story of Joseph. And in that moment, you had in a desert Christian Jews, Americans, Israelis, black, white. But in that moment, we knew we shared a common aspiration for peace, for justice, and for love. I hope that tonight in the panel, as you discuss these issues, words sink in and inspire action. This country, this world, now as much as ever, needs the best of who we are. It needs our courageous, radical love for one another. And so thank you for tonight. B'ezrat Hashem, this will be a great evening. And for Rabbi, I just want to say to you, as always, Yasher Koach, my brother. Thank you. I love you.
Thanks, Cory. I love you too. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So as I said, 20 years ago, a little more actually, I came to Temple Ben Abraham as the rabbi. I knew who Joachim Prinz was, but didn't really know very much about him. And the time of my tenure there was and continues to be, even as emeritus, a time of extraordinary exploration and learning about this extraordinary man. And Rachel, you were motivated to make a film about him. Why? What did you know? What did you and your cohort, your colleague, also Rachel, to whom we refer to as the Rachels, what made you decide to make this film? And damn it, how did you do it so well?
Thank you for the question. And I really appreciate all of the senator's words, obviously. I grew up in an integrated neighborhood in Philadelphia. It was one of the few intentionally integrated neighborhoods in the United States. It's called Mount Airy. And I didn't know that the city around me was intensely segregated. I only knew, my block, my neighborhood. As a result of that, what I thought was natural and normal was living an integrated life. And of course, as I grew up and went out into the world, I learned that that's not the way this country was mostly structured. And
how did Rabbi Prinz come on your radar screen?
Sure. So basically, when Rachel Pasternak, who's my co-producer, one day we had made another film together. We met, we became good friends, we made another film together. And she showed me Rabbi Prinz's speech one day. We were ready to do another project. She showed me his speech at the March on Washington. And although I had studied Jewish history, I had studied African-American history, I didn't know who he was. I knew someone had spoken. I knew a Jewish person had spoken at the March on Washington, but I didn't know his name or what he had said. And I read his speech and I really felt that I had been waiting my whole life to hear a speech like that, which was ironic because the speech was delivered before I was born. So why had I never heard it? And that was when we decided that we had to make sure that not just Rabbi Prinz's story, but more importantly, his message was not lost to history, and that future generations would know, again, not just that he lived, but also what he said. So
I think it's worth noting that your colleague Rachel grew up at Temple Ben Abraham. Her grandparents, whom I know, were very close friends of Prinz. And if I remember correctly, she even wrote a master's thesis about him at JTS, correct?
that's correct. And Rachel's grandmother is in the film. She's the one who tells the
Frida
story
Mayers.
about Rabbi Prinz coming to her birthday party.
That's right.
So, so that's how Rachel knew about him. But we felt that, you know, not just the grandchildren of people who had been in his congregation should know about him, but that everybody should know this story. And so we set about making the documentary. How we did it well, I think that was a combination of luck and some sort of magic that happened between the two of us.
I know you worked on it for a long time, took a while to raise the money, but a lot of people may take credit for having participated, but it was really you and Rachel who made it happen. Deborah, when you see the film, do you see your father or do you see who is this guy?
Oh, no, I definitely see my father. And when the first time that Rachel sent us a DVD to watch, I carried it around with me in my handbag for about 3 weeks because I was afraid to watch it. Because I was afraid, what am I going to do if I don't like it, or if I feel that it doesn't really represent who he was, if it isn't an accurate representation. And so when I finally watched it, and I think my brother had watched it sooner, and he was, taken with it. And really, I watched it, all of us watched it, and we felt that they really hit the nail on the head, which was quite something. It's true that Rachel Pasternak's grandparents knew my father, but she, I think only, I don't know that she ever really met him. She may have been in the congregation at some time, but he was, much older at the time. So the fact that they didn't know him at all and really captured him was very impressive. And I just want to add one thing to what Rachel said in her answer, which is about the fact that she felt she had been waiting to hear this. Why didn't I ever hear of this person? We had a screening of the film in Newark early on, and there were hundreds of Newark high school students in the audience. It was at the Newark Museum on a night that was pouring rain, and we were sure nobody would show up, but it was very, very well attended. And one of the young women stood up and said, very emphatically, why have I never heard of this person? He is part of my history. He's part of my story. Why have I never heard anything about him? So that really stuck with me. And I think with all of us, that's something that both Rachels really wanted, was for this film to be seen by young people, because it's about an era that they really don't, I think, for a lot of young African-American people and all kinds of people, they're not aware that there was so much interaction with the Jewish community in the civil rights movement. So
we're going to come back. We'll come back to the history of the early parts of the film in a second. I do want to interject here that it's been an ongoing project for the last 20 years between the Prinz family and Temple Ben Abraham to collect materials about Rabbi Prinz, because there really is very little. Your father, as you well know, had the dastardly habit of not writing his sermons down. And when you want to know about a rabbi, the best thing to do is read the sermons she or he wrote. but we got recordings, all sorts of ephemera about him, which is now housed in the American Jewish Archives in Cincinnati. And for the first time in this last decade, there's begun to be scholarly work about him, to both because it is a genuine interest and importance, and also to give him a bit of the covet that he deserves for all that he did. We will go back to the past for a minute, but let's jump a little bit. Orly, Rabbi Prinz was not part of your background. You're a Persian Israeli who came to California as a teenager. And before we began this evening, you talked, I'm going to suspect you didn't know much about Joachim Prinz, but the film had an impact on you. Tell us about it.
You know, it was,
And what it was that touched you.
I mean, first of all, the day that I watched it was such an emotional day for me for so many reasons. Because of where we are in this world right now, historically, everything that's happening around us. I have 4 young kids, ages 5, 10, 14, and 16. My 2 older kids identify as Black. You know, they've both been bar and bat mitzvahed in Israel and America. Um, they identify as Black and Jewish. And for me to watch this documentary, and you know, my family's from Iran, so we did not experience the Holocaust in that way. Growing up in Israel, you know, I don't know how much you guys are aware, but Holocaust Day is commemorated by an entire month of studies per grade level. We spend an entire month studying and learning and commemorating the Holocaust. So it is a very, very serious subject that, you know, we study an entire month. But in America, our kids don't have that experience. And as much as we, you know, as parents, you know, we take them different places and we talk to them about things. To watch a film like this, it just gives me, as a Jewish woman, such sense of pride. And I was bursting and I was crying, and you know, it makes me so happy to be able to share something like this with my children so they can understand what, you know, what is out there and what's come before them. My kids have been very, very vocal during this past year. My daughter started an organization for young Black kids, and there's 7,000 followers on Instagram that they have. And the Black Lives Movement, you know, obviously was very important to them. But here's the other side, so you can see, what was here. You can see this great, great, intelligent man, and how he stepped and how he walked and where he walked and what he said. I mean, the speech and all the letters he wrote. So it was very powerful. And, you know, I think I mentioned this earlier. I spent an entire day just, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I couldn't stop thinking about him and what would he say today? What would he think about different things that are happening today? You know, because he was so ahead of his time. He was.
We'll get to today in a few minutes. But you bring up the subject about what an incredible man he was. To me, one of the most incredible things about him was he had ideas that for the time were unusual, and his congregation was not necessarily where he was, because he was the most unconventional person, firebrand, rebel, lots of adjectives.
Revolutionary, really.
Truly. But at the same time, his congregation, which I know very well, was a pretty conventional congregation. And in this case, what was one of the things that was one of the many things extraordinary about him was the way in which he was both a tremendous visionary and speaker and motivator, but also a really good congregational rabbi. And even though many of the people at the time did not necessarily agree with what he said, I don't think, and Deborah and Rachel, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think that was ever really an issue, because their basis was so strong in their love for him and their respect for him. Is that a fair judgment? Okay, Deborah, you're giving me the look.
I think yes and no. He came to B'nai Abraham as a very, very young man. And it was, and he had never intended to be a congregational rabbi. When he came to the United States, he had other aspirations. He thought that he would be more involved with Jewish organizations, but not necessarily a pulpit rabbi. So right from the start, he kind of took over and made a lot of changes in the in congregational life and everything that they did, what many rabbis do when they come to a new congregation. But I think the fact that he had this information about what was going on in Europe at the time made him very, people wanted to hear what he had to say. And so, many people came to services on Friday nights just to hear what he would say because of the connections that he had. And, this was before CNN, so people got their news in a different way.
For the record, Deborah is not exaggerating. When I talk to some of the nonagenarians, the Jackie Levines, the Marilyn Rosenbaums of the world right now, 500 or 600 people on a Friday night was not that unusual. Unfortunately, the formal membership was not as large as that.
Right. Yeah.
But my point is that he attracted.
He did, but he had
Greek revival building in Newark.
But he had a lot of detractors. There were a lot of people who disagreed with him, who thought he was a firebrand and who didn't want anything to do with it. They were much more conservative, not necessarily in their politics, but just in their way of life. And they found him too outspoken and too liberal and too impulsive. And he had plenty of controversies with the leadership of the congregation over the years. And I think it was just because he was a good congregational rabbi, and because of this presence that he had, that he was able to do it. But I will also quickly say that it's been my observation that people think differently of rabbis and clergy people in general today, I think, than they did. Well, not everywhere. Clearly there are many communities where the clergy still plays a very, very important central role. But in terms of reform and conservative Judaism, I really think that the role of the rabbi has changed and the expectations, and I think it's much more difficult for rabbis to be as outspoken as he was now, just because I think the paradigm has shifted to some degree.
One of those changes is certainly that the decades that he was most active, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, if there were leaders of American Jewry, by and large, they were congregational rabbis. Abba Hillel Silver, Stephen Wise, whom we're going to mention in a second, and so on. Whereas today, it may be more likely to be leaders of communal organizations, American Jewish Committee, AIPAC, the Federation System, and so on. The Stephen Wise Synagogue in Los Angeles was not founded by Stephen Wise, unlike the Stephen Wise Synagogue in New York City, which interestingly was founded by him as the Free Synagogue because of freedom of the pulpit issues, which he had contended with earlier in his career. But Rabbi Wise was one of the major figures of American Jewry in the 20s and 30s. And it was because of him that it was on his recommendation that Rabbi Prinz ended up at Temple B'nai Abraham in Newark. Sarah, you have the privilege of being a rabbi in a synagogue named for Rabbi Wise. Can you tell us a little bit about this person who had such an impact on the life of Rabbi Prinz?
Absolutely. And Deborah, I was sort of nodding along with what you were saying, and I think one thing I will say is I think that throughout the decades, and certainly, I mean, I would actually say probably, the Reform movement started in Germany, and I would guess starting there through today, there have always been certain sort of third rails for rabbis. And I think, some rabbis, I think your father is one of them, said, well, I'm going to touch the third rail. And that's who I am. And I think that's very much who Stephen Wise was as well. It's why, as you said, Cliff, so Stephen Wise was born in Hungary, but brought over to America quite young, and sort of knew from an early age that he wanted to be a rabbi, and so became one. And was a firebrand in his own way. I think it's sort of interesting. He died in 1949, so we didn't really see, he didn't get active in the civil rights movement as we know it today, but was incredibly outspoken on issues of labor laws and the rights of workers. He was a founder of NAACP and the ACLU. Which I think in, 1909 and 1920, that was not necessarily the obvious path for a rabbi, and is well known, at least in, my corner of the world, not just because I work at a synagogue named for him, and Rabbi Shai Zeldin, our founder, was a student of his, but known in my corner of the world because he actually turned down a very prestigious pulpit in New York City because they wouldn't guarantee him freedom of the pulpit. Because they said, what you say up there needs to be approved. And so he founded his own synagogue, which was originally known as the Free Synagogue, based on the idea of it was a free pulpit, that whoever was speaking from the pulpit could speak freely on what mattered to them. And then later, after his death, was renamed Stephen Wise Free Synagogue. And I will say, I found it interesting doing a little of the research. There's an old, I thought it was Golda Meir, but I couldn't find the quote, but maybe it was Henrietta Zold, the joke that, Zionism is one person asking another person to give money so a third person, can help a fourth person in Israel. And, I found that sort of a fascinating coincidence that your father and Rabbi Wise met through their Zionist commitment, but yet ended up both transforming American Judaism very, very deeply. And so I was sort of thinking of that interplay also. Stephen Wise was a very, very early and outspoken Zionist at a time that, especially in the Reform movement, that was not a given or really a part of the platform. And he really stuck to that, and I think helped transform the Reform movement in particular. But I was sort of thinking about the fact that that's the axis on which they met. But yet their transformation was really in American Judaism.
Let's go back a little bit in time. One of the things I've wondered about is, what was it about the experiences in Germany that prepared him so for the impact they would have in the United States? Rachel, he was not just a rabbi in Germany; he was a big rabbi, right?
Right. I mean, you can see in the film that Rabbi Prinz became very popular in Berlin. The way it worked in Berlin was that you didn't have a fixed temple. You would go around to the different synagogues in the city. So he had, very strong youth following that would follow him from building to building as he was preaching in the different buildings. And him even becoming a rabbi was an act of rebellion, because his father was, very assimilated, not a Zionist, and I think thought that his, was not necessarily in favor of the centrality of Jewish identity for his son. The question has often come up about where Rabbi Prinz's courage came from to say the things he said, both in Germany and in the United States. I'm not a psychologist, but my husband is a psychologist. And I do think that the loss of his mother at a young age was a big part of that. I think that, as we say in the film, as he said, he did associate Judaism and Jewish identity with his mother. And so that was his greatest attachment. And I think that perhaps when you've lost the person who's most important to you, in a way, after that, you've got nothing left to lose.
Mm.
And so the commitment to Judaism and to Jewish identity, which was greater, and Jewish values and the prophetic idea of Judaism, which is what he brought to America, was much greater than a sense of his own safety.
Well, in that regard, what do we know about how other rabbis in Germany regarded him? Because he was the most outspoken, was he not?
Yeah, I'm sure there was, I'm not really sure. He doesn't talk about that too much in his memoirs. Deborah, I don't know if he spoke about that with you. I know that his Zionist activities were sort of underground. He used to have to meet with the young people. He says he met with them in the stairwell of the temple. They wouldn't give them a room, etc. So, but he didn't talk too much about the other rabbis.
Yeah, it should be pointed out that the milieu from which he came was not one which was overly friendly to Zionism.
Right.
And so he was rebellious in more than one way. I've heard it said by, I think it was Michael Meyer, an historian who knows a lot about Prinz, who both Rachel and Deborah know, that other rabbis were probably jealous of him because for two reasons. One of them was he was attracting a following that was probably bigger than anybody else's. But another one was he was probably doing things, with those sermons he gave just right up until the end that others did not have were not brave enough to give, could not bring themselves to give. And they kind of wished it was them who were doing that. The point I want to make with all of this is it strikes me that he became comfortable with the role of being an iconoclast already in Germany. So to assume such a role when he came to the States was not that big a deal. Deborah, when you were growing up, did he, so I'm going to put this to you anyway, would he equate the two specifically in conversation? Did you ever hear that come up? Germany and civil rights issues, the civil rights situation or lack thereof that he encountered in this country?
Let me get to that in a second. I just want to say something about the other point because my father, I think the thing that motivated him, in addition to the loss of his mother, was that he was really not comfortable in the milieu of Germany at the time that he was growing up, in this sort of authoritarian culture. And so I think it started with that. It started with his father because they had conflicts, and his father was very much, representative of the stereotypical, German head of household. And so there were stories about conflicts that apparently his father wanted him to go into his business, to take over his business, which was a general store. And my father didn't want any part of that. So I think it started really with him rebelling against the social atmosphere that he grew up in. And the rabbi.
Pardon me, that's really interesting because it also alludes to something else that was significant, although I don't think it was treated in the film, and that is when he came to Temple Ben Abraham, which was an old synagogue. It was founded in 1865, I think. It was affiliated with the conservative movement. Shortly after he arrived, he said, "What do you need them for? You got me." And the synagogue disaffiliated, and I believe it is the largest historically unaffiliated congregation, non-Orthodox congregation at least, in the country. And it just occurred to me that this was a bit, again, of that anti-authoritarian trend or tendency to which you were referring.
Yeah, he wanted a free synagogue too, just like Rabbi Weiss. And in the rabbinate in Berlin, he was not, accepted. He came in, and his first pulpit, so to speak, was outside of the rabbinate because he hadn't finished he hadn't been formally ordained. So he just started by being an upstart. and his Zionist ideas were, as you've said, you know, not accepted, and you know, I think there was a point at which, if he hadn't come to the United States on his own, that he might have, you know, not lasted that long within the Jewish community in Berlin, because the rabbinate was not happy with him and his ways. And your other question is about his experiences in Germany and then his experiences here. So I guess one thing that's very important to say is that I don't know what he cherished most in life. I hesitate to say it without thinking about it more, but being an American citizen to him was definitely up there in, you know, the top, at the top of the heap. He became an American citizen. They had to open the courthouse in Newark, you know, hear ye, hear ye. They had to go through the streets announcing on a Sunday, because he had to be given citizenship in order to make a speech for American troops, which he did quite a lot in the beginning. And it was such an important experience for him and my mother too, to become American citizens. And he says that his speech begins with, "I speak to you as an American Jew." And, you know, here's a guy who, you know, hadn't been American for that long, but that's what he identified with. And that's what he aspired to live in a free country, in a democracy that was really a democracy. So I think he saw it very differently. He saw the opportunities for himself and for Jews in general in a very different way. And then, you know, it's all in the film about how he...
I like the way in which he says, "I speak to you as an American Jew," with what sure sounds like a British accent.
Right.
Okay, let's change things up a little bit. Something that I think is impossible for anybody who watches the film not to think about, as long as they're engaged with the film, is, to what extent was he a product of the time he lived in? To what extent was he made for that? And to what extent could he have been universal? And I mean that in a very specific way. Could there be a Joachim Prinz today? What about him that was so exceptional, that enabled him to be as consequential as he was, could be the case today, and what couldn't? Deborah mentioned before what we might call some, well, Deborah and Rachel both did, structural aspects, namely having to do with the role of the rabbi today versus then, the rise of the Jewish bureaucracy, and so on. But that aside, Orly, you want to take a crack at this one?
You know, he, to me, in my humble opinion, and Deborah, your insight is so important, and thank you so much for sharing from your heart. To me, when I think about Rabbi Prinz, I think about something that people say to us all the time. So my business, we manage the estate of my father-in-law, and we get asked all the time, how is it that his music, you know, he passed away when he was 36 years old. He would have been 75 today. His music still speaks to the world, not just Jamaicans, not just Americans. If anything, if you leave America and you go to Europe, Bob Marley's music is a lot bigger than it is here. So people always ask me, why is his music so important and still completely resonates with parents, grandparents, children, babies? Why is it that it resonates? And I think about Rabbi Prinz in that way, because yes, he was a rabbi, but he absolutely was ahead of his time. He was a revolutionary. He believed in things, and, you know, he sort of defined Zionism and sort of set the standard in a way that he is not for yesterday, not for today. He's eternal. Like, as you know, his thoughts and his ways of living, my great grandkids can listen to it, and it's universal. So it's very powerful, and to me, someone like that, what he did for a living, a rabbi, it's amazing. It's incredible. The story about how, the congregation, the woman and her husband, they felt weird inviting him to their birthday party, and he
Oh,
showed up.
excuse me.
I
That
mean,
was, she's the grandmother. She's the grandmother of Rachel's co-producer, the other Rachel.
it's amazing. It's so amazing. But to me, his job and what he did is incredible, but a little inconsequential, really, because he was such a big humanitarian. He really is a revolutionary. Like, I put him up there with, like, someone like Gandhi, someone completely enlightened with what was happening in those days. How did a man from that part of the world come to this country, identify with the struggle of another race that he didn't grow up with? And how did he know within himself to write these letters? I mean, the letters he wrote just makes me really feel like he was not of this world. He's absolutely somebody that in 100 years somebody could learn about him and read about him. And that's why, Rachel, thank you for putting this film together, because it is so important for generations of American children, Black, white, Jewish, brown, it doesn't matter, to know that somebody like that walked this path and walked, right side by side with MLK. And,
Thank
so
you.
for me,
Can
that's
I
what he
break
is. He's
in?
universal.
Sure.
Thank you, Orly. That really segues beautifully into something that I really, really felt strongly about saying tonight, which is I've been thinking a lot about Rabbi Prinz as a prophet. And I think that the box that a lot of people would like to put him in is more of what they used to call a race man. Do you guys know that phrase? They used to say back in the times of the civil rights movement, someone would be called a race man. And a race man was someone who fought for the freedom of his people, which is obviously a noble undertaking. If your people are oppressed, you fight for the freedom of your people and you build your career on that. The question is, for the race man, what happens when the people become free? Then what do you do? And Rabbi Prinz really transcended that. He didn't just fight for the Jews. He did fight for the Jews. But he fought even more for the idea that the Jews had been given and that the Jews that he believed were trying to pass on. And so he became more of a prophet for the idea that, every person is made in the image of God and that we should all be equal. And as he says in the speech at the March on Washington, that we were all created as one another's neighbors. So when you're fighting for that idea and not just some material, objective, you begin to transcend the idea of just being someone who is fighting for a narrow cause, and you become more in line with the prophets. And the prophets were, when you're a prophet, you fight for your people, but sometimes you have to speak up to your people also. And you can see Rabbi Prinz speaking to white people, to white Jews, and saying that the freedom and liberation and equality of Black Americans is part of the idea that we were given and that we need to keep fighting for. And I think that's what really draws him to us and makes us say, this isn't just another, community leader. This is someone beyond that.
He had a very pragmatic approach that I noticed particularly in a couple of areas. One of them was the way in which, and Rachel, you and I were emailing about this earlier today, that he understood why African Americans in general saw Jews, white Jews at least, and certainly in those days, the grand majority, as another kind of white people. Because from a common sense African-American perspective, that was purely logical. And he was so good about about engaging with the world as it genuinely was. Sari, my colleague, Rabbi Laufer, regarding Rabbi Prinz, it'd be a little bit harder to be a Rabbi Prinz today, wouldn't it?
I mean, I want to say yes, because I think that's the easy way out. But I wish the answer a little bit more was no. Right. I mean, I do think that there's I think that there's also, like, I think about just the change in oratory and the way that we engage with that art that has been deeply lost, or at least certainly flattened, right? I think media has changed to a point that, like, that being said, I think there are some preachers, and I use that term very broadly, who still would fill a stadium. But I do think, I mean, I obviously am always careful about the term prophet, but I think, Rachel, what you said at the end is really what I was thinking all the way through. So there were sort of two things that I was thinking about in terms of Rabbi Prinz. The first being, right, a prophet speaks uncomfortable truths in the service of a larger truth. And I do, it sort of feels to me, I mean, look, his story was his story, and we all speak, from our story. And so, would he have, I mean, and Deborah, I'm looking at you because he's, like, would you have been you if he was, right? Like, all those questions we can't answer, right? Would he have been the person he was, had he not been born in Germany and that had been his story? I don't know. But it feels like this was his capital T truth. And, was just core to who he was. And I think that there are rabbis out there. I get to teach rabbinic students about sermon writing. And, we sort of half jokingly say that every rabbi has about 3 sermons, right? So, like, those are our capital T truths. And, I think there are rabbis out there who are comfortable putting out there the really hard, uncomfortable truths. But I do think that's hard now. And I think, for lots of different reasons. And I also think there's just a lot more voices out there. I feel like, Rabbi Prinz, a little, maybe Rabbi Heschel, Rabbi Wise, in his time, you mentioned Abba Hillel Silver, right? Like, there were these, like, all men, all these monolithic, sort of names of the American rabbinate. And I don't think that's as true anymore. And just this other thing that I was thinking, Orly, as you were speaking, and Rachel, and actually as all of you were speaking, I was actually thinking of the book of Esther, right? The story that we read on Purim, where Esther is sort of like, what am I going to do? Like, I don't want to go into the king. That's uncomfortable. That is hard. And her uncle, cousin, caregiver says, perhaps it was for a moment such as this that you became the queen. Right. And I think that, I think, Deborah, your dad sort of said, like, perhaps it is for a moment such as this that I became a rabbi. That's the moment in the Esther story where she realizes there's nothing else she can do but go forward and speak for and to her people. And I feel like your dad felt that too, that he just sort of was like, this is the moment for which I was born. And so there's nothing I can do other than speak this truth. And I think that's an incredibly brave moment to say, I'm going to speak this truth, no matter what, to some extent.
We're going to move toward wrapping this up now. I just want to make a couple of observations. The first is, and this came out before, but because I'm moderating, I get to say it again. Much of his impact, I think, well, no, I'm going to explain it this way. There's still many people around who knew Prinz well. And when you speak to them, they talk about how he was at a wedding, how he was at a funeral, when Frida Mayers, when he came to Jack's birthday party, when he came to visit them in the hospital. They don't talk about the speech in Washington. They don't talk about him meeting JFK. They don't talk about him being on television. They knew about those things and they were proud of him. But one of the lessons that as a rabbi I take away from this was that his work as a congregational rabbi, which is the most sacred responsibility he had, was the foundation on which everything else was built. And I think in a real way made everything else possible. That was true in Germany, and that was true in this country as well. And lastly, and I'm going to take off from Orly's final remarks, his story is really a timeless one. I don't see how anybody could watch this film and fail to be moved by it. And so even though I was the one who posed the question, I think it's less important, could there be a Rabbi Prinz today or couldn't there? Because we don't need that to learn from him. Learn from him by the history he leaves us, by the words he left us, and thankfully by this truly, truly extraordinary film. I also encourage everyone who is with us this evening, go to joachimprinz.com and spend about 2 minutes, it's incredibly short, watch him deliver the speech, Silence, that he gave at the March on Washington. As Senator remarked earlier, it was an extraordinary speech. His mazel that the guy afterward gave an even more extraordinary speech, although frankly, I think this was even better. But Hilary?
Yeah, so thank you so much. I want to thank all of you, and thank you, Cliff. There's just a very few questions that have come on, and really most of them have just been comments about how wonderful the film is, and the impact that he's made. Just a few questions that are interesting. There's a person who wrote that what is so frustrating about watching this film as somebody who is over 80. The last couple of generations do not realize how very closely the Blacks and Jews were connected during the civil rights. How could we bring this realization back to people today? It's a loaded question.
Well, I think the best way to bring this realization back to people today is for us to fight for civil rights. Senator Booker is working very hard right now on the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. We as Jews, we can say we're doing this as Jews, can, write to our Congress people and our senators and say how important we think that piece of legislation is. And I think if we build it, they will come, So I think that what I've noticed with students, I've shown this film to students a lot, and I love showing the film to students. And as Deborah said, they usually have a wonderful reaction to it. But I've also been fighting for integrated schools in my community and around the country, because I would rather give the kids integrated schools than show them this film. And if I show them the film in a segregated school, it doesn't mean that much to them. They need to know that we're fighting for the world we want to see.
I also, one of my, and I think Orly is really someone who's walking the walk, and sounds like your kids are as well, which I love. Is that, and I was telling Cliff, I was talking to my husband who's a born Angelino about some of the history here. I think some of it is also about being in real and deep relationship, both with Jews of color in our communities, but also, with Black communities outside the Jewish community. And I think that was very much a part of, I don't know all of the history of Newark, but I'm a New Yorker, right? That for a while, as there was so much white flight out of cities, sometimes Jews were still in the cities. They weren't quite there yet in terms of their own immigrant story. And as that happened, and as Jews sort of moved suburban, a lot of those very natural relationships started to either fray or just weren't really present. And so I think there is this incredible history and truly real relationship of the civil rights movement. And then I think I worry about sort of resting on those laurels and not continuing to do the work. And so I think I think it's less, I was looking at that comment. Also, I don't think it's that generations aren't aware of the history. I think it's that we need to figure out how do we recreate that commitment.
Yeah, I think that's great. Yeah, and I would say that some of these other questions here are also in line with that of how do you come to terms with dispelling some of the twists that maybe have come up from some people in the entertainment business, maybe, about the histories of Blacks and Jews in relationship to the narrative of both.
I think
I think
there's an area there.
as someone who's a filmmaker and a storyteller myself, I've also written a screenplay about Rabbi Prinz. I think that, I think that it's just important to keep telling stories and make them as truthful and as intellectually honest as possible. I'm not really interested in knocking down somebody else's version, but I like to tell the stories myself. So, I think that's the way to go in terms of entertainment and storytelling, is to tell our stories.
I also think that we need to know each other's stories. And I think that one of the things that I've been observing recently, well, in many different contexts, is that oftentimes people don't know what they're talking about. They make statements about other people for one reason or another. And there are many reasons that, bring people into conflicts where this might happen, but they really don't know the whole story. They don't know the other person's whole story. And they're really not, and I'm completely overgeneralizing now, but I think it is one of the challenges that we face, is getting people to understand that they have to know more. They have to go on Wikipedia and look stuff up before they start talking about it, and really, because it's too easy, especially in these, I hate to be the one to bring this up, but the days of social media, to just latch on to an idea that comes from somebody, maybe a celebrity or somebody that you respect, and not to question it, just to kind of go with it without understanding the context. So I think that that's a challenge that we face, is getting people to really listen to each other, and try to see things from more than one perspective. And that, I think, goes all around, that includes everyone.
It's great. Well, I want to thank you all. This has been a very enlightening discussion today. Really wonderful. I really appreciate you all for being here, for your time and for your commitment. And for our audience, you can go to our website, www.lajfilmfest.org. If you have not yet seen the film, you can go and you can get a ticket there. And this has been recorded today. It will be on our website and it will stay on Facebook. So if you want to watch it again, or you want to recommend it to friends or colleagues, please do so. And I want to thank you all again. Have a good day, and thank you.
Thank you. Our pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks for the invitation.
And thank you to the audience for joining us.
Thank you for the support.